catching up with the National Director for an organisation called Democracy in Colour. The name is pretty exciting. His name is Tim Lo Surdo. Tim, you should be very, very thrilled with what you've managed to do in the very short time you've been around. How did Democracy in Colour come about?
Oh, thank you so much. It's great to be here. So Democracy in Colour is a racial and economic justice organisation led by people of colour. We do two main types of work. We run campaigns and political advocacy around economic fairness and anti-racism. And the second main thing we do is a lot of leadership development and capacity building work designed to strengthen the political voice of people of colour. So we're a startup. We're about 2 years old. We came about for three main reasons. We identified sort of three gaps in the anti-racism space. The first one being that there wasn't enough political advocacy and campaigning work happening around the issues that matter to our communities. The second one being that we wanted an organisation that was actually led by people from impacted communities. And the third gap being that we wanted to tackle the issue of racism from an economic justice lens, from more of a structural and systemic lens.
I'm fascinated because, as you can imagine, with my background, I've been a member of the minorities for an awful long time. And when we started in television 40 years ago, people were looking at us and calling us the tellywogs. Can you imagine? So although we've made great strides, we still have an awful lot of room to grow. And you're living proof of that. Where did the name Democracy in Colour come from? And who was not the one with the germ of the idea, but the one that has been sparking you guys along from the beginning?
Well, the name came from, I mean, Democracy in Colour is an organisation led by people of colour, led by people from multicultural communities. And so that's where the colour component came from, that we would have really, the whole part of the organisation, you know, our reason for being is that we're about centering the voices of frontline communities. And then the democracy part came from that we really believe in the promise of democracy, that inequality of resource can be breached by equality of voice. And that's the promise of democracy, that we all have a share in building and owning this country and society and making it fairer and more just and sustainable. And that promise has been perverted by, you know, big money in politics, by lobbyists, by mega corporations. And the organisation is about reclaiming that promise. And the only way we can reclaim that is by ensuring that everybody who lives in this country is able to participate actively in democracy, including Australia's multicultural communities. And so that's where the name came from. In terms of, you know, what motivated us and sort of gave us the drive, I mean, it's nothing precedes purpose. And for us, it's the idea that structural racism is very much alive in this country. It goes back more than 232 years to the idea of Australia being constructed in genocide and the mass dispossession of land and culture and children, and you know, 232 plus years of ongoing and historical colonisation of First Nations people. So that's very much where the drive for our work comes from.
Well, that's marvellous to hear, because there's been this wave of awareness sweeping the world with the arrival of COVID-19. We see the goings-on in America. We see the rallies for Black Lives Matter, not only across Australia, but across the world. The question I have for you at the moment is, all these campaigns are incredibly important, but we also have an emergency, a medical emergency globally. Is it wise, is it smart to be taking on the authorities with rallies like the Black Lives Matter rally that's been, the people have been trying to hold in Sydney and other cities across Australia? And again, I agree, 100% right to hold it, but it's all about the timing, and you know full well the timing is absolutely critical. Should we be saving up and this energy for another time, or is it that important that we have to do what we can when we can?
I think that's a really interesting question, and something that's definitely been debated about right now. I think there are a couple of components to my answer. I think the first component is that it is definitely the right time to be talking about this. In fact, it's probably too late, right? You know, we're talking about police brutality in America. Obviously, police brutality in America didn't start with the death of George Floyd. It's been going on for decades, centuries. And the same thing here, right? We've been watching the scenes in America both what's led to the protests and then the reaction of authorities to the protests with horror from here in Australia. But there are parallel injustices happening right here. Our institutions incarcerate the highest number of Indigenous people on the planet, despite making up about 3% of the population. 29% of Australia's prison population is Aboriginal. That are 100%, all of children in prison in the Northern Territory are Aboriginal. That there have been at least 434 Aboriginal deaths in custody since there was a Royal Commission into Aboriginal deaths in custody in 1991. And there have been no convictions for these deaths. So this has been happening for decades, for 232 plus years, since colonization. And we should have been having this conversation decades ago. And the reason why we haven't is because people who don't want us to have this conversation try and construct these excuses, these facades, these smoke screens to ensure that we don't have those conversations. And I feel like this is another one. If people really wanted to have a public health argument about whether we should be holding these rallies or not, we wouldn't be having them, because the chief health officer here in Victoria, experts have repeatedly said that there have been no evidence of community transmission from the Melbourne Black Lives Matter that was a few months ago, and yet we see these far-right fringe commentators conveniently, and repeatedly try and bring it up because they don't care about the science, they don't care about the public health issues. They're just desperate for a smokescreen to ensure that we're not having this conversation about how there have been more than 434 deaths in custody since 1991, and there have been zero convictions, no accountability. So I think it's definitely the time to be having this conversation, and that's the whole point of protest, that it inconveniences and that it agitates people to open their eyes to an inconvenient truth, so that we start to see change and we start to see some accountability.
Tim Lo Surdo is our guest on The Informer. He's the National Director of Democracy in Colour. Tim, Democracy in Colour, to run organisations like this, you need a bit of money to fight the good fight. So how do you guys get the funds that you need to not only promote and keep doing what you're doing, but to fight the next campaign, the one that comes for tomorrow?
Yeah, so it sort of splits into a couple of buckets. Our main bucket is through small dollar donations. So people chipping in $20, $30 a month. We're very much owned by our membership, who, without their support, their ongoing, monthly, regular donations, we wouldn't exist. And then there's another source of funding that comes through our training work. So we run these fellowships and anti-racism workshops and a whole bunch of other trainings designed to improve the racial literacy of organisations, and also provide leadership training opportunities for multicultural communities. And we get funding through that. And then we have some major donors and philanthropists who, through their foundations and generosity, enable our impact as well.
You're a small group fighting in a big fight, but it allows you to be agile, to be able to pivot, to move and make yourselves not only more evasive, but more capable to answer the needs of the campaign. Is it proven exactly that to be the case?
Yeah, definitely. I think the ability for an organisation like ours to be nimble is critically important. I mean, social change is an ecosystem, and we need a wide variety of different organisations playing their role. And we need organisations that are more established and institutional, and we need organisations like ours that are a bit more scrappy and startup to be able to pivot rapidly. And I think COVID-19 is a great example of that. As soon as COVID-19 started the impacts of it started to flow across the country, we immediately pivoted all of our programs and our focus to orient itself around COVID-19, and started doing work to campaign for a wage subsidy for all, so that the 1.1 million temporary visa holders, international students, undocumented workers, and people seeking asylum that have been cruelly excluded from JobSeeker and JobKeeper aren't. We did a lot of lobbying to states and local councils to introduce income subsidies for those that have been excluded from federal support mechanisms. And we've done a lot of work to try and ensure that everyone can access healthcare, including undocumented workers. So that's an example of how an organisation like ours, through its structure and its size, is able to be nimble and to respond to the circumstances and the demands of the moment.
Mate, thank you for giving us some more insight on what is a very important opportunity in the history of this nation. Democracy in Colour is the name of the organisation. Tim Lo Surdo is the National Director. Thank you, Tim, and all the very, very best.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.